We'll let folks join and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining us here this evening. We're looking forward to hearing Marty speak. We're just giving it a moment now to let participants join, make sure everybody's in. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let folks join. We'll start on Irish time, a couple of minutes after the hour. Hi everyone, we're going to start just in about a minute or two, letting folks join. I've popped a link there in the chat box. That's just a link to all of the events that are happening during our month of Women in Irish Design. So you'll see Marty's talk listed there, and then 3 other talks that we're having every Thursday right through February. So have a look through those. If you're not signed up to those, please do. We hope you can join us for as many of these sessions as possible. We've a good number in now, so I might get things started. First, to welcome you all and thank you for joining us this evening for this hour and 15 minutes, a journey through 150 years of creative Irish and Irish American women in the arts. My name is Kevin Byrne. I'm Consul General here at the Irish Consulate in Chicago. I look forward to the time when I can welcome you in person. We're not just there yet, but we're hoping to get to that stage later on in the year. So very much looking forward to seeing faces and hearing voices down the line this year. This is the first of 4 events that we have in February, what we're calling our month of Women in Irish Design. Really this stemmed from St Brigid's Day. St Brigid's Day falls on the 1st of February every year, and around our embassies and missions all around the world, Irish diplomats see this as a time to celebrate the contribution and creativity of Irish women, both in Ireland and right around the world. We felt there was too much to celebrate in one day, so we've planned 4 events throughout the month of February. Our first is with Marty. I'll introduce Marty briefly. You can probably see him there in the corner of the screen. And Marty will be speaking to us about 150 years of creative women in the arts, and it really is a phenomenal overview of such a broad range of creative industries, both art, music, film, design. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Our next talk next week is looks at the present and future of women in Irish craft. That's with the Design and Crafts Council of Ireland, and 2 really exciting young Irish designers. In 2 weeks' time, on Thursday at lunchtime, we have an event with Grafton Architects, 2 Irish architects, Shelley McNamara and Yvonne Farrell, who run a practice called Grafton Architects, which in 2020 won the Pritzker Prize, obviously based here in Chicago, which is known as the Nobel Prize for Architecture. We're doing an event with them in partnership with the Chicago Architecture Center. We just had a talk with them this morning, and I think that's going to be a great event. So please tune into that. And then our final event is a look at how Irish women have to create and shape fairer societies. And that's looking at the contribution of Mother Jones, the Cork and Chicago labor rights activist from the end of the 19th century. And we also have an exciting commission to announce at that event. I won't speak too much further, just a few little housekeeping pieces. We are recording. Obviously, this is webinar format, so all that people will see are your questions, but please do pose questions. Marty's going to really go through a whole range. 150 years is a long time frame, and there's so much talent and so many interesting artists and creatives in that time. So any questions, please pop them in either the chat or the Q&A. Q&A is probably better, so I can find them all there. And then towards the end of the talk, I'll have a chance to pose those questions to Marty. There's also a special, I suppose, a mini concert towards the end of the conversation, which is really a treat. We've had the chance to listen to some of it here in the consulate, and it really is some spectacular music from some phenomenal artists. So you'll get to look forward to that towards the end of the talk. We have your email addresses. We're going to send you out just some details. We'll have a link to the talk once it's finished. We're going to post it on the Department of Foreign Affairs YouTube channel, and we'll also share it on our various social media. So you'll get to look back and maybe learn a little bit more or rediscover some of those artists or pictures or pieces of music that really struck you. There's also a list of 100 women throughout the past 150 years who've really shaped their various art forms. We'll share that as well. Marty has said he's more than happy to hear of people that you feel should be added to the list. This list is really a chance to discover more and also to share amongst friends. Many of you will know Marty. Marty really needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. Marty Fahey was born and raised in the South Side of Chicago. He grew up surrounded by music, singing and dancing in a really vibrant community of Irish immigrants and their families. I suppose this love of music came from both of his parents, Martin Sr., who hosted a weekly Irish radio program for 50 years, and his mother, Mary, taught and judged Irish dancing. Together, his parents founded and hosted Ireland on Parade, which is a week-long celebration of Irish culture leading up to St Patrick's Day, which began in 1967 and still runs to this day at Gaelic Park. Marty eventually took up the playing of traditional Irish music as a hobby, playing piano and button accordion, and has several recordings to his credit with local musicians Liz Carroll, Brendan Bulger, and others. In 2007, he began working with the O'Brien family in Chicago, and since then has assisted in the creation and curation of their really remarkable collection of Irish art, antiques, and artifacts. Together with the O'Brien collection and a wonderful team of musicians, Marty helped to lead and produce the CD of music that accompanied the Art Institute's landmark exhibit in 2015, Ireland, Crossroads of Art and Design, 1690 to 1840. It featured music both from the time period of the exhibit, as well as new compositions sympathetic to the themes by local fiddler and composer Liz Carroll. Recently, Marty has been working with the University of Notre Dame's Keogh Nocton Irish Studies program and the Snipe Museum in Notre Dame to explore avenues of multimodal conversation between curricular topics and treasures from the O'Brien collection. At the moment, this effort is finding expression in their monthly series, Irish Art Amplified, and we'll send you on the link after this event, which seeks to combine Irish pieces from both the O'Brien and Snipe collection museums amidst poetic and musical interpretations. Now, before I hand over to Marty, I just want to thank him for sharing his knowledge. It really is, he's such an engaging speaker. Those who've heard him speak before know that he speaks with passion and authenticity about art and the creative process. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Marty.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. And welcome, everybody. And I want to thank Kevin, Sarah, and Sandra for inviting me to do this and for hosting it and for helping me to work out some of the bugs on the techno side here. Everybody who knows me knows that is not my thing. So thank you for that. I also want to thank the people who've taken time this evening to have a listen in here. Hopefully you'll feel at the end of it that it's been worth your time. I come to this project not just with curatorial experience, but also with personal experience of great women who have surrounded me, both on the music and on the art side and on the personal side. My mother, my stepmother, both my grandmothers, and my lovely wife, who's my #1 fan and supports great sessions here at the house and all the crazy music things that I get involved with, as well as art things. From my grandmothers specifically, I would say the music came, both of whom were button accordion players. And then my mother had a great ability at art. I don't think she ever really explored it as much as she probably should have, but she had a knack for it. And my stepmother, as was mentioned, was a judge and a teacher of Irish dancing. And so I couldn't get away from Irish culture at that level, even if I had wanted to, and I'm glad for it. This evening, we're going to talk about 4 different groups of people across the panoply of the arts, starting with painting, drawing, sculpture, and photography. Anytime, as Kevin said earlier, when you make a list, I find myself too, when you see a list of something, 3 reactions tend to happen. A, why is that person on the list? B, why isn't that person on the list? Or C, who is that person? And a list is finite, and the kind of talent involved here is almost infinite. So there's no way to make a list that is all encompassing. I welcome all 3 of those reactions, because to the extent that it creates conversation and more thoughtfulness around this subject matter, I love it. So that being said, I've chosen 18 people to speak about this evening. Given the time that's in it, to speak about 18 people requires brevity, which is not my strong suit, but I will do my best. I imagine that we're all at a party together, and it's my job to introduce 18 people to you. I'm going to say enough to hopefully do that, and to hope that your conversations with them in their art forms continues on your own time, but not so much that you're scratching your head saying, when will they stop talking? So here we go. We're going to start first with Margaret Crilly Clark. Margaret Clark was a wonderful portrait artist who was born in 1884. She died in 1961. She was born in Newry, County Down. And she, like many of her cohorts in the art world, attended the Metropolitan School of Art in Dublin. She was highly regarded in a competitive field of talent there, to the extent that the famous teacher and painter who spent a lot of time as a tutor there, William Orpin, regarded her as his favorite student and chose her as his assistant, which, given William Orpin's talent and, I dare say, ego, that would have been quite an honor. That must have meant that she had phenomenal talent, and indeed she did. Unfortunately, she sort of ended up in a situation where she married a more famous artist, Harry Clark, who, anybody who knows the name Harry Clark knows that in the world of stained glass, he's up there in the world of Tiffany, as we see in this country. Phenomenal work. But Harry Clark was always busy and sickly. He had tuberculosis, and they were running this company together, and she was raising her children as well. So her ability to stick with her own art diminished and went to the side as she managed her family and the increasing pressures of the business. But she was a phenomenal artist. 2017, I believe, there was a retrospective of her work at the National Gallery, and that slide there that right below her name suggests that it was wonderful. We didn't get to see it, but I believe it was wonderful, and the catalog is still available on the National Gallery website. The painting to the far right here, Mary and Bridget, is an example. It looks like a portrait, and it is a portrait, but it isn't merely a portrait. It is an allegorical piece. It happens to be Margaret's sister and niece, Mary and Bridget. But from an allegorical standpoint, it also represents Catholicism and the St. Brigid and the Madonna and Child. So it's an Irish version, if you will, of that. This painting left Ireland in the 1920s and was discovered about 25 years ago in storage in Nova Scotia, of all places, and is now being written about. And it's just a wonderful example of her work, I think. These 2 paintings, the one on the right is of her daughter Anne, and the one on the left is a recreation of an old myth of Samson and Delilah, where she cuts his hair to gain his power. And you can see just the tremendous level of skill that is evident in her work. It's really quite remarkable, I think. In the upper middle is a picture of the students at the time with William Orpen, and that's Margaret sitting right in front of Orpen. In addition to allegorical work, she also did some work for the Irish Dairy Board to create posters to sell dairy products aboard, and the bottom right corner is an example of that. Then there's kind of a fun picture in the middle here called the Airman of Inisheer. And we haven't quite gotten to the bottom of it because it doesn't all line up, but Alcock and Brown were the first to fly across the Atlantic, and they landed in Clifton. This is called the Airman of Inisheer, which of course is in the Aran Islands. So we can't quite get these to coalesce, but the timing of the event suggests that what she's depicting is that story where this crazy thing flies down from the sky, lands in a field, and the airman is there greeting villagers, and they're trying to make sense of him and vice versa. Next on our list is Gabriel Hayes. Gabriel Hayes was a wonderful sculptor who was born in Kildare, spent a lot of years in Dublin. And she, like many of the people on this list, had a range of abilities. She was known mostly as a sculptor, but she was a great painter. She was a great book illustrator. She did wonderful wood carving work, not just stone work in carving, and metalwork as well. There's a picture of her on the right here, of her painting Alois Fleischmann, who was a very famous professor of music down in Cork. And then in the middle, a picture of her in the newspaper while she was carving, and of course, woman sculptor at work. They had to kind of point that out because that would have been very unusual at the time. One of her more famous pieces is at the corner of Cathal Street, called the Three Graces. And it is an evocation of the Three Graces and reapplied to domesticity. It was a school of domestic science for young girls. And to give you a sense of the size of this, it's still there. That sculpture weighs 17 tons and is 10 feet tall. The painting to the right was done in 1941. It was done down in Limerick. Gabriel's husband, Sean O'Riordan, was an archaeologist by trade and a very well-known archaeologist. And he was doing some work down in Limerick. And while down there, she was painting, and she depicted a scene that is rarely seen in Irish art of road bowling. And this has become quite a famous painting of hers. And if you know anything about the artist Sean Keating, you can see the influence that Sean, as her teacher, had on her in the figuration. And Sean Keating was taught by William Orpen, just like Margaret Crilly Clark was. And so you can see that academic realism coming through. It's really an engaging painting called The Cork Bowler. Here are pieces that people have probably walked past and not seen because it's above your head as you're walking past the Department of Commerce, the Industry and Commerce on Kildare Street. But these are beautiful sort of Art Deco flavored fresco type relief carvings that she did. And it would have been very unusual for a woman sculptor to get the commission for these in 1941, but she did. And they're still there to this day. And above in the upper right corner is the drawing that the family owns that was done for that sculpture, which is below it. One of the longest standing commissions she received in the late 60s and the late 50s, excuse me, and it went on for 17 years. These are full-size Stations of the Cross in Galway Cathedral, which are really remarkable in their scope and their scale. And of course, we've all had Gabriel Hayes in our pocket and not known it. She designed the halfpenny, the 1 penny, and the 2 penny in the 1970s. It came into existence in 1971, I believe, and was retained through the 1980s. So she sculpted the work. She got the commission for those, and they're taken from the Book of Kells. The presentation plaque to the left is just a wonderful level of detail. On Tostel was a series of festivals and competitions that were held by Board Falcha, and this was a presentation plaque for one of the winners. Next is Mamie Gellett. Mamie Mary Harriet Gellett was born in 1897 and died in 1944. If you could pick out one person to talk a great deal about in terms of their impact on Irish art in the 20th century, it would be Mamie Gellett, for all sorts of reasons. She was absolutely a pivotal player. And there's a great book that I recommend by Bruce Arnold on her work, which does, I think, a wonderful job of taking you through the trajectory of her career, and there's quite a trajectory there. So not only did she personally develop significantly as an artist, she helped Irish art develop significantly by her work. This would be a good example of the trajectory. If you look at the dates below these nude studies, 1915, 1919, 1921, these relate to times in her life where she was receiving different kinds of influences and tutelage. You can see that the 1915 piece is very academic realist, and you would see that somebody who can paint like that has tremendous skill. In 1919, she went to England and studied with a painter named Walter Sickert, and that introduced her to a little bit more of an impressionist point of view, and that crept into her work. And then she and her friend Evie Hone went to Paris and were intrigued by Cubism. And they studied with two people there. This painting is an example of the influence of André Lhote. And there's a sort of soft Cubism going on here versus what happened next with her, which was quite a change, and we will see that next. So in the bottom left corner, composition 1923. Now today, that would not look remarkable or problematic, but when that was shown in 1923, it caused an absolute uproar in Ireland. And there were all sorts of hemming and hawing and unkind words said about that painting. But what is interesting is that she has clearly turned the corner away from figuration towards abstraction. And as a matter of fact, it just happens to be a historical coincidence, but her and Evie Hone started taking lessons with Albert Glazes, their second tutor in France. They paid their money the day that the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed, December 6, 1921. And they helped Glazes, who was a well-known painter at the time, to not only work out the theory of Cubism, but they advanced each other's work. In fact, Glazes said that, people have said that Mamie was a student of mine. I think she may have taught me more than I taught her. And there was lots of theory going on behind Cubism, because it was a complete departure from representational realism, where perspective is pretty much thrown out the window. So how do you create the sense of spatial relationships when perspective as the typical tool is gone? So there's lots of theory, and you can see here on the page some working out of those theories. Below that drawing above is a very famous painting called Homage to Fra Angelico that she did. And Glazes did a painting like it at the same time. And you can see that there's a religious theme going on there. She was very religious. but it's a religious painting, the likes of which people had really not seen before. In the late 20s, she moved away from the coloration that you see on the left side towards much more avant-garde use of color, moved away from a lot of the angularity that you see on the far left towards a circularity and rhythm and rotation that you see very mature on the right side of the page here. When, as an example, the flower forms painting, what she was after there is not so much a depiction of a flower, but the essence of flowerness, the energy, the life force inside of flowers. And so it happens to be a painting that does burst with color and energy. The painting next to it, Ackle Horses, the same. It sort of, you can, even though it's flat, if you will, it has an energy about it and a rotation about it that is really kind of compelling. And this lovely painting, of course, on top of the Virgin of Era in 1943. It's St. Patrick on the left and St. Brigid on the right. These next two pieces are favorites of mine. The one on the left actually is in the Irish Embassy and is called I Have Trodden the Wine Press Alone. And before the call here, Kevin and I were actually, he remarked, but I agreed that in COVID times, we have trodden a lot of wine presses alone here. But it's a beautiful, beautiful painting, a very mature painting done in 1943. The painting to the right is a signature piece by her done in 1940. And much like flower forms that you saw in the last screen, this was an attempt to depict the entirety of the land of Ireland, not a specific scene within Ireland. So she wanted to capture the ingredients that people were used to and exposed to inside of Ireland. Maini was also well known for designing rugs. And here are some examples of those designs. The rug that's shown in place on the far right is also at the Irish Embassy. And coincidentally, today, I found the original drawing for it, which is directly to the left. You can see, it's interesting to see the coloration differences and the slight changes of line that happened. Don't know if that's something that Maini changed herself or if it got changed in production. But we can see, of course, that her drawing shows fringe on the far ends of the rug and the actual rug in place does not. In addition to being a fantastic painter, she was also a great theorist and wrote essays on Irish art. She taught people Irish art. She was well respected as a supporter of Irish art. She was one of the founders of the IELA, which is the Irish Exhibition of Living Art, which was thought to be somewhat of an antidote to the more staid conservative RHA in Dublin. And she was a great promoter of modernism within Ireland, not just of her own work, but of anybody's work that was thinking along those lines. And there's an interesting little paragraph I'm going to read to you from an exhibition catalog in 2014 that I think says a lot about Maini, but it also says a lot about the great female artists of the time. Here we go. This was written in 2014. Male artists tended to conform more to the expectations of the dominant establishment, which then had a nationalist conservative agenda. Instead of looking abroad into the future for the development of art in Ireland, they looked inwards into the past, to reviving, maintaining, and strengthening an Irish identity, which manifested itself in a more academic, artistic style. The majority male group was well served by their political connections and access to the media. Naturally, they held considerable public sway. The most prominent Irish commentators and critics were all men and weren't afraid of using occasionally condescending, chauvinistic language to belittle female artists. Whereas Irish artists such as Sean Keating and Aloysius O'Kelly were looking to the west of Ireland for inspiration for a new nationalism based on the traditions of the noble peasant of Erin or Achill, female artists, by contrast, looked abroad to Europe. And in fact, France played a vital role in the creation of an Irish national art scene. So that is, I think, does a good job of sort of explaining how so many of the female artists at the time were really forward-looking and really changed the Irish art world in a way that many of the male artists did not. The next person we're going to talk about is Helen Hooker O'Malley. I don't know her, but I do know her son, Cormac O'Malley, and everything that he's told me and I've read about her tells me that this lady was, in addition to being phenomenally talented in many different arenas, was also in the category of a force of nature. She was talented at an early age. She came from a wealthy family in Connecticut. She was born in 1905, and she traveled because of her affluence, was able to travel widely. And one of the places she traveled to was Ireland, where she met Ernie O'Malley. Many will know the name Ernie O'Malley. Those of you who don't, he's an important person to know in both Irish art history and Irish history in general. He was I won't say too much about him because this isn't about him, but to give you a sense of them as a couple, he was an IRA general, a very prominent one, then an incredible author and an incredible art critic and collector. And he and his wife together befriended many of the people that we're talking about today and bought art and supported them in their early days. And as a power couple, if you will, as patrons of the arts, they were apparently unparalleled. There is a wonderful documentary being done right now that is going to come out next year called A Call to Arts. I believe there's a little trailer on Vimeo. And that's worth seeing to get a sense of the kind of breadth of ability and passion that she and her husband had. But back to her. She was well known for sculpture, for poetry, for theater and set design, as a collector and, as I said, an advocate and patron of the arts, and also did some wonderful photography, which we're going to see next. These photographs were done in Mayo, mostly in the 1930s through the 1970s. And they're as good as photographs of depicting the character and the feel of the people in the landscape as I've ever seen. This was Ernie O'Malley here to the left. And I thought I'd put back Maney Jellett's painting here. Maney and Ernie and Helen were good friends with one another. And this painting was purchased directly from Maney by the O'Malley family. And it's amazing to look at that painting by Maney and that picture by Helen and how much they echo one another. You know, is this life imitating art or art imitating life or both? It's amazing that a Cubist style of a painting like that could capture so much of the essence of Ireland, and there's the proof of it right next to it. Next, we'll talk about Elizabeth Lily Williams. I mentioned that there were a handful of wonderful artists who came out of the Dublin Metropolitan School. This is a picture of some of those students together in one of the classes. Lily Williams is there holding the head, and above her right shoulder is Margaret Clark, we've already spoken of. Lily Williams was born in Dublin and was born into a conservative unionist Scottish, well, it's not Scottish, sorry, Presbyterian family. And to her credit, she really stood her own ground politically, became very good friends with Arthur Griffith, who asked her to design some stamps, which we'll see in a minute, for raising funds for Sinn Féin. And shortly after the uprising in 1916, she did this piece called Hibernia, 1916. Now, to our eyes today, this looks perhaps sweet or romantic, but I can assure you that when this was seen in 1916, it would not have been seen as either sweet or romantic. It would have been seen as very provocative, especially by her own family. As many people know, the tricolor, which wasn't really institutionalized until 1937, even though it had been around since the 1840s, it was illegal to display it. And so in 1916, when it was hoisted above the GPO, that was a fighting moment. And to have Hibernia, here, Mother Ireland, if you will, draped in the tricolor was a fighting moment. To have Hibernia as well crafting the Constitution there is a interesting reiteration of Hibernia, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Recently, this piece was selected to be the cover of Leaving the Ladies, which is a true story of about an amazing meeting that happened around this same time and with Countess Markovitz and some other folks. And the book and the play is by Sinead McCool. So let's talk about kind of the range of Hibernia here, and then we'll come back to Lily's work. Hibernia is the female personification of Ireland. And in this country, we had Columbia prior to Uncle Sam. In England, you had Britannica. And in Irish history, you typically had Hibernia shown with the harp and or with, in this case, the wolfhound, or both. As late as 1907 here, you have Beatrice Elvery, who was another contemporary of Lily Williams, showing a more religious Madonna and Child Hibernia. And in 1915, you can see Harry Clarke's very sort of Art Nouveau interpretation of Hibernia, the one that we know so much of, Lady Lavery, who is Hazel Martin Lavery, John Lavery's wife, that was on the currency for 50 years. And below you've got Margaret Clark, again, it's her iteration, as we saw before, of Hibernia, and a more interesting contemporary one by Rita Duffy. So each of these makes sense in their time. They each speak to a different audience and sentiment at the time. And we're back to Lily Williams here and her wonderful piece. There are several more pieces by her, so you can get a sense of the range of her work. And as well, one of the stamps that Arthur Griffith had her design for Sinn Féin. Next, we're going to move to the next group of folks, what I call artisanship. So rather than painting and sculpture and photography, we're talking about things being made with the hands, sometimes that have utility, sometimes that don't specifically have utility, but are not paintings, drawings, sculpture, etc. And we'll talk about Neame Barry, Sybil Connolly, Eileen Gray, Louise Kennedy, and Elizabeth Yates. First of all, Neame Barry. One of the words that I've used to describe the people chosen for today are that they are game changers, where they are remaking or have remade or are, I think, due to remake the category in which they work. This is certainly somebody who fits into that category. And interestingly, when I spoke to somebody else who is featured here this evening, today, she listed Neame Barry as one of her favorite people as inspiration. The ability with LED technology to change the way lighting is designed has, I think, never been more beautifully captured and turned into sculptural effects than by Neame Barry. There's some examples of her work. The far left picture, Falling, is in the O'Brien collection. And the top right picture is an interesting piece. It's in the Central Bank in Dublin. And it uses as its inspiration, I'm told, the 1st century BC Brighter boat, which is in the National Museum. And of course, you can see the complementarity between those pieces. The way Neem discusses her work is that she says, I make three-dimensional drawings in bronze and light, transcending utility, looking for simplicity and perfection, seen and also felt viscerally. And having been around her work, I would say that that's absolutely true. You don't look at her lights and say, oh, that's a light fixture. It's really a beautiful piece of lit sculpture. Next, Sybil Connolly. Now, many will know the name Sybil Connolly, I would imagine, who would be attending this. But in the 1950s, Sybil Connolly put Ireland on the map in the world of fashion. Prior to that, and still to the case today, I would suppose, Italy and France and London are thought of as the centers of high fashion, high couture fashion. And Sybil Connolly was an amazing character who had tremendous talent, again, across a wide range of abilities. And she was also apparently a wonderful businesswoman. And she felt that Ireland had phenomenal products to use, meaning tweed, lace, crochet, linen, and wools. But she felt that in order to really attract the world to the quality of those fabrics, we have to put them at their best advantage in the best clothes. And she certainly did that. And Jacqueline Kennedy agreed with her. Apparently Elizabeth Taylor and many others like her agreed with her. And in fact, the formal White House portrait of Jacqueline Kennedy is a linen dress by Sybil Connolly. Here are some examples of her work, which look as current today as when they were done. And she had a tremendous ability to have a diverse point of view as well, which I love about these slides together. Last year, the Hunt Museum in Limerick launched an exhibit of her work, which you can see online, and you can log on and see it to this day, which takes you through in more detail the legacy and the abilities that Sybil Connolly had. While she was known as a fashion designer, she also employed her abilities with fabrics of all kinds and was well known in the world of interior design, and also edited some wonderful books on the Irish country houses, especially Georgian architecture. She lived and worked in Marion Square in Dublin. And so that's interestingly just across the street from somebody we're going to talk about in a minute. But she's somebody who, again, was a game changer in her category and is regarded by up and coming designers today as sort of the mama bear, if you will, or the matron of the fashion industry in Ireland. Eileen Gray. Eileen Gray was born in 1878 in Enniscorthy in Wexford and passed away in 1976. She lived a very long, productive life. Her mother came from aristocracy, apparently, and her father was an artist himself. She went to the Slade School, as many did, in London, and then, as many also did, followed that with a trip to Paris and made that her home the rest of her life. People will know, when I go to the next slide, people will know Eileen Gray's work, even if they didn't know Eileen Gray made it. She is an icon in the world of modern design and was quite threatening in her day to the would-be icons at the time. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So in 1927, she designed this house for herself and her lover at that time. And interesting, I'm just going to read what this says because the house has just been restored, which is fantastic because it's lived through some hard times, but it's definitely an icon in the world of modern architecture. The house emerged as a model of a new approach to modernism, like contemporary houses designed by Le Corbusier, Walter Gropius, and other modernist pioneers. It had white walls, large windows, a flat roof, and incorporated industrial materials in its construction. But Gray's design was gentler and more sensual in spirit than theirs. Shortly after E1027's completion in 1929, Gray split from Bottivacci, her lover, and abandoned the house. She started work on a new home in nearby Castellar, while he remained there at the home. Le Corbusier often visited him, and while staying with Bottivacci in the late 30s, he painted 8 enormous murals on the walls. Gray, who had not been consulted, accused him of an act of vandalism. Having clashed with the powerful Le Corbusier, she was ostracized by the design establishment and lived reclusively until her work was rediscovered in the late 1960s. She has been hailed as a star of Sapphic modernism and cast as a feminist heroine, notably by the architectural historian Beatrice Colomina, who described Le Corbusier's action as misogynistic declaration of war against Gray. And a lot of people have written that she was very challenging to the people who thought that they were better than her in the day. And here's an example of why they were threatened. These pieces of work would be considered contemporary today, and they are from the 1920s and 1930s. The little table at the bottom the bottom left, has been in production ever since it was made. She designed rugs as well, which you can see there. And as it mentioned in one of the things I read, that she really thought in curves rather than straight lines. You can see this gentle curvature that reappears in this rhythm in all of her work. She also designed lighting and had an amazing ability to design lacquer work, which I didn't know until I read about her, is extremely exacting. And she was a master of it and sold these beautiful lacquer screens to high-end clients in Paris. Louise Kennedy. Louise Kennedy is, I suppose, the person whom most people would consider to be the heir apparent of Sybil Connolly in Dublin as the doyenne of Irish fashion. There are great interior designers and fashion designers in Ireland. You hear Louise Kennedy's name in every conversation about people who are the best. I've had a chance to speak to her today, which was delightful. And she gave me some ideas about people that she looked up to. And interestingly, she mentioned Sybil Connolly, and she shares Marion Square address with her. And she also mentioned Neem Barry, who we've spoken about previously. Louise opened her own practice in the mid-'80s and is searching for timelessness, not for trendiness. And I think when you see her work over a long period of time, and even the most recent collection, which you're going to see the pictures of possibly for the first time tonight, you see that. You see that there's great character and longevity in those designs. It's not something that somebody's going to get tired of in 2 weeks. So she sent me these pictures today of her most recent collection that is coming out. And interestingly, the scarf that is on the far right side is done in collaboration with Ballyfin Hotel in Laois, and some of the plaster work that is in the wonderful Georgian house there. This last picture is special for a bunch of reasons. This is a dress that Louise designed for the daughter of the family that I work for, the O'Briens. This is Carmel O'Brien and her wedding dress from last year. And Louise, when we were talking about these pictures today, she just paused and she said, "Isn't she just the quintessential bride?" And it'd be hard not to agree with that when you see these pictures. Elizabeth Yates. So as I mentioned, and everybody knows the name Yates, especially W.B. Yeats. Some people know the name Jack Yates, his brother, phenomenal painter. Some people may even know the father, John Butler Yeats. But most people don't know the name of Susan and Elizabeth Yates, who were alternatively known as Lily and Lolly. And so because they're lesser known in the Yates family, which is an incredible dynasty of talent across a wide spectrum of the arts, I thought we'd speak about Elizabeth. Elizabeth was born in 1868 and passed away in 1940. She was really regarded highly as a printer, publisher, and not so much an artist herself, though when you see the next slide, you would disagree with that, but as a teacher. She and her sister were part of what was called the Dun Emer Guild and Dun Emer Press. And they produced incredible work between the Dun Emer Press and the Kula Press. And at all times, both the Dun Emer and the Kula Press were family-related affairs. W.B. Yeats contributed to it. Some of his books were published by it. Jack B. Yeats did some illustrations for it. Some of his work was published by it. And they published the work of other people, Jonathan Milton Synge and some other folks as well, but they had incredible abilities across, again, a wide range of talents. There's some pictures of the Dun Emer Guild and some banners that were made that are in Loughrea, of Irish saints that are in Loughrea, Galway Cathedral. What she's probably most known for is the Kula Press with her sister. And people regard this whole publication, this whole enterprise as being one of grace and simplicity. She and her sister took the reins of this enterprise for many, many, many years. It was sometimes subsidized by the brother. It apparently didn't do well financially, but was highly regarded artistically. As happens in many families, apparently Susan and Elizabeth did best when they were apart from one another. And there's a little quip that's been published, quote from Anne Yates, the niece, who at the funeral of Lily, casket fell off the stand and said, well, that's Lolly having her final word, I guess. So they had a tumultuous relationship, but like sand making pearls in an oyster, they produced incredible work together that is highly regarded today. If you go to buy these prints today, which are taken out of the original publications, they fetch a great deal of money and are highly regarded for the character and quality. The next topic that we're going to talk about is the written and spoken word. And here we have a variety of folks again. Ciara Ní, Lady Augusta Gregory, Patsy Kelly, and Aoife Mannix. And before I tell you anything about Ciara, I'm just going to play this for you because it will tell you more than I could tell you about her.
How are you today? Are you good girl?
Mina nullag in Uri, hánig an tauki. Biog bídach bon jarrig is bug. My sister had a baby, so the baby has us. Fairy nullag Leraint, a step back in time, all siblings vying for their turn to hold her, and behold our new station. It's the birth of an age, we shift up a generation. I pass her to my mother. She brings us closer, lán dóchish. Tagin tex o wam, and near a duyarum. Bahussa malanav biog, is tu gufol, saulig muhra, ni egi she gdio. She sends us spinning. My yad a rash a sugra a cherubween, roha moor an teal. O veil magrafair, tagin glor ar maher. Ashai ri changan the lani a vifui hu and a gokal ar gree. Frittel ar mamo, on a mamo fain fado. For her, we dust off fossils of knowledge, relearn the names for foxglove, cockle, curlew. Támuid a rothlú. Timple is timple, láv láv, sheer bohrí na smuinte. Is de réir mar a hitin bally cort chlór fihe fihe. Dar vagal gan tada ag bun na spére. Cohí in the hámclór lehuamwid, le rihum a will fall to river. And when heaviest I feel this year's bleak, numbing drudge, I rush time until the clockwork arrival of her quacking laugh, the tight clutch of her hug. Isha a húv níon me, nor a támir tígul. Despite the year that's in it, she reignites our spirit, our vestigial ability to feel each minute. The dark cracks apart, bright slivers glisten, waving at buses, dancing in the kitchen. Titin she, is Gontep Shasin Arish. Is she our lochran don ahail san avlin? Keavai inti, she's brand new. Who are we? We thought we knew, ach nur a hiúnig an fúder a vatan asul, bachasul, nach ravan shin ach la varul. And we're spinning. Infinity is cyclical. These times are strange, but not exceptional. Rugu pashti in almana and chater, riv and all, gerti, triblodi, eigendal. Is ní vai ein chwivna eki an gruachas sho. Skira garrod awan in a hashter fada falon. Fecum inishe. Solis glay a sailray, is sheena osmarayk I wad again. A cade lost skulle, a cade turris ailner bus, a cade or I lor slue ag currum chalánach kjol, a cade vlasha gare fuishke, a cade fust, a cade fogue, singing until sunup, roaming the globe. Mina nullig an uri, hánig an tauki, biog bídach, ban jarrig is bug. Our lochrin, our solas, our nochis. Tá sé fad na backán fós.
Wasn't that wonderful? So Chiara is a writer, a teacher, a poet, a broadcaster. She has her own YouTube channel. She does a whole series on the Irish language and getting people to appreciate it again anew and to use it and appropriate it correctly. And I've traded a couple of emails with her, and she strikes me as somebody who is passionate, intelligent, and caring and interesting and vibrant, and is somebody who I think is going to be a game changer in the world of poetry and performance. Lady Gregory. Lady Gregory sort of needs no introduction, but I will tell you a little bit about her, and then I'm going to move along a little more quickly because we're falling behind here a bit, so I apologize. She's a folklorist and author, playwright, and co-founder of the Irish Literary Theatre and the Abbey Theatre, and a dear friend of W.B. Yeats and Douglas Hyde, and went from being, in some ways, a person of her class and culture, growing up on a 6,000-acre estate, to becoming a phenomenally well-respected folklorist, somebody who then went to study the Irish language, went to write a book about folklore tales, collected them from the local people, and wrote plays and books that honored the non-big house part of Ireland, even though she lived in the big house part of Ireland. Her, again, force of nature kind of personality, as I understand it, was not just highly regarded for her skills in writing, but highly regarded for her managerial and diplomatic and linguistic skills as well. As an illustration here, in the early 1900s, her plays, this play in particular, is often credited, which she wrote with W.B. Yeats, as having ignited the tinder behind the poets rising towards 1916. And so she became an ardent nationalist over time. Interestingly, when we talk about W.B. Yeats and her, and we talk about the skills that the Yeats family had, this little picture called A Guide to Cool Park, that watercolor there is done by W.B. Yeats of Lady Gregory's house. So not only was he a great poet, but incredible artist really in his own right. She is really regarded as one of the pillars of the Irish literary revival. So many people say that her work was pivotal, that the Abbey Theatre and theatre as you understand it in Ireland might not have been able to happen without her determination and her foresight and her skill. From the sublime to, shall we say, the ridiculous, and that's probably not the right word here, but you'll see when we get to it. Patsy Kelly was named Patsy because she was the person getting in trouble all the time. Her real name is Sarah Veronica Kelly. She was born in 1910 and died in 1981. She was known as the Queen of the Wisecracks. I have, for people who know a little bit about her work, you'll smile when you see this, but she had a great twist of wit, which you'll hear a little bit of here in this clip from Warner Brothers.
Do you mind if I smoke?
I don't care if you burn.
Now, I'm the sheriff.
Well, do your duty and go back to sleep. Come on. Where are all these movie stars like Garbo and Gable that you were going to show us?
Did you want to see stars?
Well, certainly. You didn't think we wanted to look at you all night, did you?
Try it on him. Go on, hit.
All right.
Don't be afraid. See? Didn't hurt a bit. Now try it on me.
Oh, okay. Honey, do you realize that this thing goes up in the air? Why, of course. Well, do you know what goes up must come down?
Why, Miss Moore, you're not frightened.
Oh, no, but I'm so afraid that I might get frightened that I'm scared to death.
You're always looking for new faces in Hollywood.
New face. By the time he sends for you, you'll probably need one. What did you go up there for in the first place?
Well, it isn't every girl that Ronaldo Lopez would have in his apartment.
You're right. He'd have to look a long time to find one dumb enough to go.
You see, Dagmar is what you call temperamental.
You mean what you call temperamental? She's what we call nuts.
So she was quite the character. She started out in Broadway, in vaudeville, and because of a problem with an actress in Hollywood, she ended up replacing a woman named Zazu Pitts under the direction of Hal Roach. Hal Roach had his own studios in Los Angeles and produced lots of short movies, especially comedy movies. And she became a comedy duo with a woman named Thelma Todd, shown here in the middle. And they were quite the characters, apparently. But when Thelma died a mysterious death in her garage, that ended. And then they tried to replace Thelma with a woman named Lyda Roberti, who also died. Patsy got, amongst other things, the moniker of being a jinx. Added to the fact that she was openly lesbian at the time. Now, this is the 1930s and early 1940s, where there were morality clauses that kept bound actors and actresses to their contracts with the studios. And so to violate that was not good news. And apparently she was pretty open about the fact that she was a lesbian and was doing underground comedy in lesbian bars at night. And she was brought into Jack Warner's office, who said in the early 40s, "You can't do this, this has to stop." And she allegedly told him what he could do with himself. And so ended her career. She was blacklisted for the next 15 years. She was not able to appear in anything in movies. So she went back to Broadway, and she went to live with a friend of hers who was quite a star on Broadway, Tallulah Bankhead. And Tallulah put her in her own play called Dear Charles in 1955. And the first movie she was able to appear in again was called Please Don't Eat the Daisies in 1960 with David Niven and Doris Day. You'll see her regularly dressed as a maid because she often played the wisecracking sidekick and/or Irish maid. When she went back to Broadway, in the early 70s. It came at an interesting time. Broadway was in bad shape. It had given up a lot of market share to television and to movies and had become quite run down. And a group of people had gotten together apparently to say, we have to revive this or it will be gone. And they decided to do that, to spark that revival with a renewal of a show from the 1920s called No, No, Nanette. And it turns out that it did exactly what they hoped it would do. And it also relaunched Patsy's career. She got a Tony Award for her role in No, No, Nanette. I know a fair bit about Patsy because she is my great aunt. She is my grandmother's sister. And that's kind of an interesting story too, which I'll try to make as brief as possible. Patsy and my grandmother's father worked for the RIC, which stands for Royal Irish Constabulary. You would have been a policeman being paid by the English government in the early 1900s. And he apparently was informing on the IRA on the side, making a little extra money, wherein they came to him and said, look, you have to be out of Ireland by All Saints Day or we'll be praying for you on All Souls Day. So he had to leave overnight. He left 2 daughters and his wife. He came back for them a couple of years later. And one of them, my grandmother, was apparently ill and it wasn't a great idea for her to travel. But more importantly, I'm told the uncle said, there's no way she's going back with you. So as a result, my grandmother ended up growing up in Ireland without siblings. Meanwhile, the rest of her family grew up in New York, and Patsy and my grandmother did not meet one another in person until 1969. And this is a picture outside of LaGuardia Airport of them meeting. Aoife Mannix. So everybody has somebody that they can point to that say, this is an aha moment. And for me, a poem that I read by Aoife Mannix was such a moment. There's a painting in the National Gallery right here called Paul Henry Launching the Curragh. And I had seen it many times. And then a book was put out by the National Gallery called Lines of Vision, Irish Writers on Art, which is fabulous. I recommend to everybody. And it had a lot of wonderful poems in it, but it had this poem in it, which sort of forever changed my appreciation for poetry and its power to illuminate and to change the way you see things. So I'm going to quickly read it if that's okay. This is a great painting by Paul Henry done in about 1910 in probably Achill, because he would have been in Achill at that point. Men in white shirts and caps, arms outstretched with the weight of black. The shadow of a boat glistens on sand as the tide rolls out. The wild waves of the Atlantic churning wet and cold. The water as blue or dark as drowning. For the fishermen never learned to swim. Better to sink in her arms than struggle for hours in harsh storms that have no known cure. They turn their backs on the sanctuary of dry land, hide faces from the trap of soul-stealing paint. Their eyes are salt-stung and wet as they reflect the 100,000 colors of the sea. Her brush they have felt many times out there alone, when the stroke of death threatened to wipe their figure from this vast canvas. So when I read that, I realized I can't ever look at this painting the same way again. And it's because of this poem. And that's a happy experience. It really sort of put the light bulb on for me with respect to poetry and its power. Aoife is a poet, a writer, a teacher. She's a poet in residence at BBC Radio 4. She was born in Sweden of Irish parents and raised in Dublin and Ottawa and in New York. And people refer to her work as lyrical, admirably free of clutter, which it certainly is. It's beautifully edited. There's that book I was telling you about and some of her collections of poetry. Lastly, the last section here is called Music to Our Ears, and it has in it a group of people that I know probably better than the other folks previously, because I grew up with several of them and knows the others. So it's Eleanor T. Neary, Joni Madden, Trinity Donnell, and Liz Carroll. Eleanor Kane Neary was born in 1915 in Chicago and died in 1993. She was an amazing piano player, like nothing I have ever heard before. And I play piano, and I played piano for 45 years, and I have yet to hear anybody who can do what she could do when she was 17 years old. In fact, she made her first 78, commercial 78, when she was 17 years old, which is unheard of. People like Coleman and Morrison in Irish music were the people doing that, not Irish piano players. She didn't have anybody to listen to, so she really invented and perfected Irish piano playing on its own. And here's a good example of it.
A set of hornpipes from a homemade 78 in 1953 at Neary's house in Chicago. Joe Derain, Eleanor Neary playing a couple of hornpipes.
Remarkable piano playing. I was lucky to have Eleanor as a mentor for several years in the 70s, and though I can't aspire to that, I really appreciate and understand what she was able to do. Rather than talk about Joni, Joni does a great job of introducing herself here in this video, so I'm going to let her do this. Joni is a wonderful musician and well-known in the world of Irish music, and the founder and leader of a group that many people will know of called Cherish the Ladies.
Hello, I'm Joni Madden, and I was born in the Bronx, New York, of Irish parents. My mother emigrated from Milltown Malbay in County Clare, and my father, Joe Madden, was a great accordion player, and he emigrated from Portumna, County Galway. And my father had a very, very successful Irish music and dance band. He first came out and joined the great Paddy Kaloran and played with him for many years, and when Paddy retired, he gave my father the band. And as soon as I could play 2 tunes, I was in the band with my father. And it was very important, as children of immigrants, my parents, it was very important to them that the kids carried on the culture. And we all played Irish football and Irish dancing. And my father was thrilled when I showed interest in the music. And through my father, I got to meet fantastic musicians that emigrated from Ireland, some of the greatest that ever played. We were so fortunate, lived and made their home in New York. And I grew up learning from 3 great flute players, Mike Rafferty, Mike Preston, who was with the Tulloch Band, and Jack Cohn, who wound up eventually teaching me and giving me my start. But my hero when it came to the penny whistle was a great whistle player from Dublin named Mary Bergen. And you only heard of a few names when I was growing up of women that really had made it to the forefront. One of them was one of my heroes, Liz Carroll. And you often heard speak of Eleanor Neary. And my father would often speak of the great fiddle player from the Ballina Band, Aggie White. But it was a phone call from Mick Maloney that got me started on the road with Cherish the Ladies. And Mick contacted me. Myself and Eileen Ivers and a bunch of us had gone back to Ireland, won All-Ireland championships. And we were so proud as Irish Americans bringing the medals back. But Mick said, you realize that you're all women. And we hadn't realized that we were women that had won all these medals. And Mick said he'd like to do a concert celebrating women because it was a change in the tides. He did research back to the Philadelphia Irish Musicians Society, and over the course of close to 100 years, there was 3,200 members, and not one of them was a woman. And he thought, this is amazing what's happening now, that not only women playing Irish music, but becoming the best. So he asked me to help him organize this concert series, and I suggested the title Cherish the Ladies, the name of a traditional Irish jig, never knowing that we'd be stuck with it all these years, and I would still be at the helm as of today, 36 years after the first concert. But we've traveled around the world, and I'm actually very proud because when we started, there wasn't any other Irish group that were made up of females that are on the road, and we had to break down a lot of barriers to get to the point where we are, and for people to realize that we weren't a marketing ploy, that we actually were very powerful musicians, and we knew what we were doing, and we knew how to entertain a crowd. But at the end of the day, I'm so proud of everything we have accomplished, but I'm honored to be a part of this wonderful series with the Irish Embassy and celebrating St Brigid and the role of women and celebrating women's in the arts and of all across the spectrum of everything they've done to achieve. But I'm going to play a little air for you on the whistle, and it's a tune called Manana Heron, and which means Woman of Ireland. And it's a tune written by Sean O'Rida from Coolay in County Cork. And Sean was an amazing musician and composer, and he had this group called Kyotori Coolin that later went on to become the Chieftains. But in this tune, I play my penny whistle, but it's not just one penny whistle. There's no synthesizer on this track. I layered 16 penny whistles in all different sizes and tones underneath it to make a bed of a choir of whistles. So hope you enjoy this piece of music. It's called Manana Heron, Woman of Ireland. Up the women for this month. Woohoo!
Wonderful music there from Joni. And this is a picture of Cherish the Ladies and her holding court there and keeping the orchestra going around them. A wonderful accomplishment to be able to hold together a band over that many years. That's really quite amazing. Trina Ní Donald. Trina, again, is somebody who probably needs no introduction, but to those who don't know, is a phenomenal singer, composer, piano player, and has been part of really seminal bands in the history of Irish traditional music. The Bothy Band, Scar Bray, Night Noise, Relativity, and as well has done wonderful recordings on her own and more recently with her sister Mairead. We're going to play a piece that she composed for her mother, who is known as Brigid.
Hello, my name is Trina Ní Donald, and my mother was named after St Brigid near Brigid, and her name was Brigid, and this is a little piece that I wrote for her.
And as I mentioned, Trina now does a lot of work with her sister, and with other people as well, and they're a wonderful duo together. You should get to hear them sometime. You can Google them or check them up on YouTube. Thank you, Trina. All right, my dear old friend Liz Carroll here to bring up the end of our evening. Liz and I have known each other and played music together since 1973, and have collaborated on a handful of projects together over the years, wonderful projects. Liz is well known as a fiddle player and a composer, and as a teacher of Irish music as well over the years. And I'm gonna just have her introduce her piece here, and then I'll say a few more words after she's done.
Hi, I'm Liz Carroll, and I'm happy to be here celebrating St. Brigid. Along with the Irish music and dancing I was exposed to growing up, there was church and prayer. All of my relatives and dancing and music friends went to Catholic schools, and for my part, I danced or played my fiddle at countless fundraisers for the Columban Fathers or the St. Patrick Fathers. We played music for masses, weddings, and funerals in Chicago. In my home, we prayed the rosary every night. I have a cherished tape actually from 1967 of my grandmother and grandfather and a share of uncles and aunts saying the rosary, kneeling on the floor of my mom's home in Limerick. Of course, St. Patrick is celebrated in a big way in Chicago, only because there was a time when the men were in charge, but we've always known of St. Brigid. While St. Patrick is that fellow who spread Christianity in Ireland with big deeds, snakes, Brigid, while founding monasteries and spreading the faith, is also the saint who sits with you when you're sick. And when you're not so sure of how things are going and you want to pray for direction, she's your saint. The tune you're about to hear is a tune I wrote some years ago, thinking about how, even though we're born here, we first-generation Irish are so darn proud and attached to Ireland. But we're not born there, so we're equally proud of America. This is a tune for my fellow children of immigrants, and today it's for St. Brigid, patron saint of Ireland, whose simple cross adorns the walls of homes in Chicago, the United States, Ireland, and the world.
Wonderful music from Liz there, who's our own treasure in Chicago. 1975 winner of the Senior All-Ireland Fiddle Competition, which is like winning the Olympics. T.G. Caher, Composer of the Year, 2011, National Heritage Fellowship Award, 1994, Grammy nominated, on and on and on. She's well known for her awards, but what's through all of that, she's just a great person and a wonderful composer and wonderful fiddle player and a great friend to many. And we love having her here in Chicago. There's some references that I put together for people. We're finished here now, except for some questions that if people want to look into, I would suggest that these are books that have been good for me. And if there isn't time to kind of write these down and people want to, we can always figure out another way to get this information to you. But there are some wonderful things that you can look up yourself for your own edification on your own time. And thank you everybody for your time. It went over a little longer than I had hoped, but hopefully you won't look back and say, well, there's an hour and a half I won't get back. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself. Thank you so much.
Marty, thank you so much, my lord. You've got a wonderfully natural way of imparting knowledge. It kind of falls like rain and rises like mist. It's really wonderful. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to read the comments, but fair to say everyone has been loving this and loving learning about the various different in various different areas of art. An interesting, nice little piece. Kira Ni's mother actually sat beside one of our panelists in school in a wonderfully Irish twist there. small world.
That's great.
There were a few questions. I have a few questions, and there's a few questions that have come in. I think, look, we'll say to folks, look, we've run over a little bit, but feel free to stay. Marty, if you have time to answer a couple of questions.
I'm happy to stay. It's
great.
It's my problem that you're all late. Sorry.
So folks, if you can stay with us, please do. We'll run through a few of the questions. If you need to go, we fully understand. We'll send on all of those details that Marty posted. We had a question from Virginia Hurley here, speaking about Gabriel Hayes. And she asks, did Gabriel Hayes study in Dublin with what became the National College of Art and Design? And she asked because when she was there in the 60s, the word was that no women were allowed in sculpture by ruling of Archbishop John Charles McQuaid.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I know that she went to the Metropolitan School of Art and was taught by Sean Keating. But as to whether or not she went to the National College of Art and Design at that time, I don't know, but I'm curious now, and I will write that down as something to check out.
Wonderful. And then another question we had in from Erin McCarthy was, were there any women able to make a name for themselves in traditional music in the late 19th and early 20th centuries?
Wow, that's a good question. Late 19th and early 20th centuries. I am unaware in that time period of women who were well known at that time. Most of the people that I know the name of would have become more popular and well known starting in the 40s and 50s. But that early, that far back, not that I know of. Now, there may have been some singers that I'm unaware of who might have been better known earlier than that, but not musicians. You know, certainly I think people have to realize that for the longest time, women were thought to have their rightful place in the home, managing the children, so on and so forth. And so the time required, set apart the talent, the time required to be well known would not have been generally at their disposal.
That's fascinating. And again, I suppose part of that, one of the things I found really interesting is you mentioned how male artists would have been more conservative and academic in their artistic style. You mentioned, you know, the new nationalism, where I suppose female artists looked abroad. Is there a sense then in Irish art in particular that female artists were more progressive in a way and helped to pull, I suppose, pull Irish art forward, and that the male artists would have followed, or was it just that they just had a more international outlook?
My understanding, I've heard several different versions of the answer to this question. I think generally the answer is yes, that women would have been more avant-garde. The women who were practicing art for the longest time were coming from financial backgrounds where they didn't need to rely on the sale of what they were making to put food on the table, whereas the men did. More of the men did. And so as a consequence, the economic imperatives of putting food on the table required them to kind of stay inside of maybe more narrow lane markers. It's not that they wouldn't have been interested in being more avant-garde, but they had market pressures that they had to respond to. And it's my understanding that many of the women didn't have the same pressures and could afford to explore things that the men might have liked to explore.
Okay, fascinating. We have a question from Mary Hendrickson. She says she hopes we have more links or direction for the Margaret Clark Irish Dairy Board posters. Is there a particular show, a book, or a resource where folks can find out more about those?
I will look into that. I am aware, I have seen a picture of a handful of them together, but I couldn't tell you right now where I saw them together. But I think I know somebody who might be able to tell me that. So sorry, Mary, but I will look into it.
And then probably a very difficult question for someone who spends so much time around beautiful art and craft and artisan pieces. Is there one of I suppose, the painters in particular or sculptors that you spoke about today that really sticks out for you as, you know, possibly either the most influential or the one that most sticks with you?
Well, most influential and sticks with me are, they dovetail, but they're not the same answer. From the pictorial art, I would say the Manny Gellet Land era is an astonishing tour de force of the theory of Cubism and figuring out a way to depict the entirety, the character of a country instead of a typical spot, which would have been the norm in landscape painting. So how to depict the variety in character in Ireland in one painting and not have it fall apart in disparate, unrelated pieces. I find that an astonishing piece of work. And when I recently put it together with Helen Hooker's picture, the light bulb just sort of didn't just go on, it blew up for me, just how successful that painting was at doing that. There is something about Neem Barry's work that I just find tantalizing. She's really redefined lighting. Whereas, you know, not too many people, you could look at a great painting and say, well, I love that, or I like that, but you're not necessarily saying that's redefining painting. Whereas her work is redefining lighting. And the last question would be maybe The Cork Bowler by Gabriel Hayes. I just love that moment that is captured and the way it's captured and the colors and it's just gorgeous. So
yeah, it's interesting for me that the Gabriel Hayes piece. I'm ashamed to say I never heard her name, but my God, do I know her art? You know, Cork Bowler, I know it. I used to work in the Department of the Taoiseach, and I walked past those sculptures, the very modern sculptures, and have always admired them, always looked up.
Yeah.
And you know, the 1-2p halfpenny, just I never thought that somebody sat down and ever designed them. But, you know, wonderful to see things that have been so much part of your life and realize a little bit about the person behind them. So looking forward to discovering more. I think it was great what you said about you know, conversations. Imagine you're at a party and having conversations with all of these artists and creators and designers and musicians. I know that's a lot of conversations that we're all going to have now going forward as we discover them. And Marty, I think at some stage we'll maybe have you back to speak again. I feel we could have done a whole series with you. Obviously, you had to put a lot of work into this, so thank you for that. You're probably maybe not rushing back to do a whole series just yet. But just look, thank you so much for for this. It's been a phenomenal evening and a wonderful start to us for Design Month.
Oh, great. And thank you everybody for your time. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. And folks, we hope you can join us next week. It's at noon with the Design and Crafts Council and two really exciting young designers that at some stage in the future, a future Marty may be speaking about as people who've really helped to define their work. We also have Nora Gaynor from the Art Institute who'll be moderating that event. So,
great.
So you can join us next week. Marty, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining us. A belated happy St. Brigid's Day, and have a safe evening.
All right. Take care now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.